All right, well, welcome to Garfield Memorial Church. If you're worshiping with us online, if you're tuning in during the week, and we know some people pick that up at different times, we hope you'll feel the energy of this night together. Glad to meet you. If we haven't met, I'm Chip Freed, the lead teaching pastor here at Garfield Memorial. And so great to bring in this new year with you. I want to introduce you to a friend, but also a newer member of this church, Miguel Hernandez. If you haven't noticed, Miguel has been, we always feel like, we need to use both sides of our brain. I forget which side of the brain I'm speaking to. Am I speaking to, is it talking the right side of the brain, Pastor Terry, or the left? Left. And then thank you. Thank you, Pastor Lori, saying to Pastor Terry to tell Pastor Chip, who doesn't know his left from his right, but also to get the holistic experience. Miguel teaches at Cleveland Institute of Art. He's newer to Garfield, but also the other thing, he was part of the class of 2022 with the DC Comics. I got to get this right. The DC Comics Milestone Initiative. He was part of that. I'm like, did you make Batman? Like, what's up? How cool that is. And he has a brand new comic series coming out called Hanzo that is going to be hitting. You're going to want to see that. So thank you to Miguel, his family, his wife. He's almost as happy. He's in his element tonight. But he's not quite as happy as he was just 4 weeks ago when he was in the baptismal pool with me and two of his sons were being baptized. So that was really, really cool. So if you want to look at him and kind of listen to me backwards, that's okay. That's what we're doing. But we want to get the sense of this, really the gravity of this night. And gravity is a good word because, that word is that the word came down. God came down to where we are. I know we think somehow we got to get to God. We've got to do all the right things. We've got to pass all the tests. We've got to finish all the rules. But we serve a God who came down. God got involved. God got with us, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, just in case you didn't know. And no other religion in the world, no other religion comes close to saying what we say, that Word became flesh. The word is carne. You know what carnivore is? He became meat. He became one of us. He became an infant. He entered into the humility, the vulnerability of the world. And I don't know about you. Anybody old enough to remember 2020? There's a few of you were. Doesn't it seem like it happened right after the Civil War? I mean, it seems like generations ago, right? In 2020. And it disrupted things. Even our staff, we go around, we talk about like pre-COVID and post-COVID and like it was an event from yesteryear. I don't know. Like it happened right after the comet that killed all the dinosaurs. Like it's so long ago. But it was disruptive, right? Did you enter into some new trends in your life after that? I did. I came into a whole new situation on my television with my remote. I learned something I didn't do pre-COVID. I do skip intro. Anybody do that? Anybody binge watch, or is it just me? Like, I never binge watched before, but after COVID, man, I am the binge watcher of the year. And when you're binge watching something, like when they film these TV series, they think we're still, back in the pre-COVID era where like you'd watch it one week and then you'd wait for the next week to watch the episodes. No, we don't do that anymore. We want stuff fast, we want now. So I watched the whole season, right? In like one sitting, 8 episodes. And they do the intro to remind you what happened last week, right? But it's not last week, it was 5 minutes ago, so I just skipped the intro. I don't need to see what happened, I just watched it, right? At Garfield Memorial Church for the last 5 weeks, we have not skipped the intro. John's gospel, his very beginning words, are the intro. It's his Christmas story. There's no shepherds, there's no angels, there's no magi or mangers. Just in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning. I love that. That's why we're going back to the beginning in January. I hope you'll come back. God has really been dragging me back. Sometimes we don't need to just pick up where we left off. Sometimes we need a clean slate. Anybody here need a clean slate in your heart? You want to wipe like the last few years away and just start over, like say to God, can I get a do-over? Well, we can get one. You know why? Because in the beginning was the Word. I love that. First 4 words of the Bible is in the beginning, God. Not in the beginning, Chip. Not in the beginning, your family tree. Not in the beginning, your intellectual degrees. Not in the beginning, your political party. Hello. In the beginning, God. Unexplained, undefined. Nobody can vote God in. Nobody can vote God out. He's God all by himself. I always tell people, if you start to read the Bible and you get in the beginning God and you flunk that, shut the book and start over. And John picks up on that. John, the gospel writer, he knew the stories. Matthew, and Luke tell us what happened. John tells us why. And he said, in the beginning, God, the Logos, the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things came into being through him, and apart from him, not one thing came into being. And what came into being in him was life. And the life was the light of all people, the light that enlightens everyone that was coming into the world. And I'm stuck with that. When I talk about John's gospel, I mean, Mark tells us that God was the suffering servant. Matthew tells us he was the rule breaker. Luke tells us he was the merrymaker. But John tells us he was the night spoiler. He's the light. The real light that we need to come into the world. And that's why we've titled this series, Where There's Night, There's Light. That's John's message. This is a very dark world, in case you haven't noticed. And it's been that way for a long time. And this isn't a situation where we can kind of think our way out of things. We can't vote our way out of things. We need light. And Isaiah said, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. For those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has dawned. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we can create the light, but that there is a light that comes in that can illumine us, that can bring us out of our darkness, that can give us, an understanding of things. If you were with us through this whole series, we were talking about, the Bible continually talks about night and light and darkness and light, and darkness can signify evil and suffering. That's why, sometimes we'll say, I'm in a dark place. If you read Job, Job went through a few things. You think you had a bad day, read Job, right? And Job says, my face is red with tears and darkness is on my eyelids. Like we know that. And darkness can also mean ignorance. We say, I'm in the dark. That's why that word, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. If you were with us, anybody grow up with the King James Bible and it used to say the darkness comprehendeth it not? Because that word, the verb they use about darkness has two meanings. One, I said in a sermon at the beginning of this series, it's like the word master in English. Master can mean overcome. It can mean to conquer something. I've mastered my fears, right? Or it can mean that I understand something. I've mastered calculus. I never did, but it's a good rumor. We can say that. So it's aspect of overcoming our fears and also understanding the true ways of God, what God wants to show us, to lift us out of our ignorance. And that's what we're talking about with the light. I had a classmate hit me up way back. I don't think I've talked to him in 40 years. He hits me on Facebook and we do some of that, but we haven't had a conversation. But he said, Chip, when I saw your series online, Where There's Night, There's Light, I just had to tune in because he said, looking at our country and looking at our world, it just feels so very dark right now. And he said, I don't know if there's ever been a time that I've needed candlelight Christmas more than this year. That to know that there is a light, that there's a light that comes. And Micah said it this way. Well, actually, I jumped it last year when I always get my best Christmas stories after Christmas. And so next year about this time, I'll be telling you stuff I learned about that happened this year. This was last year. This was actually in Gaza after the terrible war that took place, right? We know the horrible thing that happened to Israel as terrorists came in October, and then the horrible thing that happened to innocent people in Gaza as children continued to die. And last Christmas, when the bombs were going, they found this in the rubble. Some of the Palestinian Christians had gone out and put a nativity scene in the midst of the rubble. That's where there's night, there's light, right? Micah said it this way, when I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. That God does not leave us in this darkness, but that God enters into us. On December 15th, we had our wonderful children's play. It was amazing, and Pastor Steve preached at this service, and at the 9 o'clock service, we had an amazing heritage concert, and so they gave me like 6 minutes to preach. Don't you wish you had that power every Sunday? Some of you really do. They do in the back. It kind of scares me. You know, they can turn me off at any time, but they said, yeah, Chip, do it in 6 minutes. So I got up on that morning, and in 6 minutes, I told them the 4 original Christmas carols. Do you know what they were? Do you want to take a guess? You guys are well-behaved. They weren't. They were just naming all the carols. I'm like, guys, way before all that. It's in the Gospel of Luke. Mary sings the first one, the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord. Zechariah sang the second one. He didn't really believe the message that when the angel Gabriel came to him in the temple. I mean, he's like the high priest. He's like the Pope. And the angel showed up and said, hey, Jesus is coming to the world. He said, don't believe it. The angel said, like most of us preachers, you talk a good game, sit it out. And then he went to a teenager. I mean, Mary was 15 tops. And she believed. And when she showed up at Zechariah and Elizabeth's house, Zechariah sang the second carol of Christmas. And he sang this, by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to do what? To give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. My God, have mercy. Guide our feet into the way of peace. I was reading, I don't know why, I read weird stuff. And I was reading a biography about Hank Williams Sr. I've had a conversion experience at Garfield. I really have. I'm really like a music nut. I mean, I was a DJ back in the day. It was a good movie, Rent It, leather pants, the whole deal. Okay. I heard you back there. But, I love music. There was one brand of music, though, I just never could get my head around. Country Western. I couldn't. It's taken 20 years at Garfield. Some people have redeemed me. They have. Actually, Dre and Leah, Kenya, our children's pastor, my wife Terry, they started saying there's some good stuff in country music. And I thought, wow, 4 of our African-American leaders are teaching their white pastor how to like country western music. It just doesn't sound strange until you say it out loud. It's one of those only at Garfield things. But I've come around to country western music. I kind of like some of it. I mean, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I'd have said, man, if I had to listen to an hour of it, I'd give up all our national secrets. But I was reading about Hank Williams Sr. Some say he's the greatest country western artist that ever lived. I don't know if I didn't know it. But Hank Williams, do you know he died at 29? He had spina bifida, and because of his pain, he got addicted to painkillers and alcohol and drugs, and lived a very troubled life. They kicked him off the Grand Ole Opry. But toward the end of his life, he was seeking something. He was looking for something. And he wrote that song. My gosh, millennials, you guys will have to Google it, but some of us remember it. Do you remember that song he wrote toward the end of his life? I saw the light. Remember that? I saw the light. I mean, that's what he wrote. I saw the light. No more darkness. I'm not going to believe I'm singing this. I'm not that redeemed. No more darkness. No more night. Now I'm so happy. No sorrow in sight. Praise the Lord. I saw the light. Hank Williams was 29. They were bringing him to his concert for New Year's Day at Canton, Ohio, just south of us, at the Canton Memorial Auditorium, and he died in the back seat. The crowd didn't believe that Hank Williams is dead. And when Hoxie, what a name, he was the leader on stage, and they said, no, it's true. And 3,500 people broke out in I Saw the Light. I Saw the Light. One Hank Williams biographer that I was reading said this song is the prayer of every backslider in need of redemption. That's all of us, isn't it? That's all of us. We need light. We need to know that there's hope for us. When I think about that, I think about this cross. A friend of mine out in Kansas City has one of them. This cross comes from a woman named Janelle. Janelle's an inmate in Tennessee. She's in this women's prison in Memphis, serving a 10-year term. She's also a member of one of our particular denominations' churches. It's a Grace Place. What a great name for a church. Grace Place United Methodist Church. It's the only church I know that was ever planted in our tribe behind bars. And Janelle's a member of that church. And in that church, she found Christ, and she worked in the mess hall. And so she began to, this is where the church is, in this prison right here. But in the mess hall, she worked there, and she found out she's an artist. She dug out of the trash, and she got the boxes that the jelly came in, and she made the bases for her cross. And then she dug out another day in there, and she found the boxes that the biscuits came in, and she tied them into strips and made a cross, and she's made 5 of these, and now she makes other forms of art. She sent one to Robin Roberts on Good Morning America when she was diagnosed with an illness, and Robin stopped Good Morning America to lift up this light that came into her life. I mean, Janelle is in prison sharing the light. And she wrote this. She said, after Robin Roberts lifted her up, she said, now I felt like refuse. I felt like trash to other people and to myself. I had no hope. But then Jesus saw me, and he brought light to me. That's her words. He brought light. On the bottom of these crosses, she writes on every one, he is the rock of my salvation. And at the end, she said, now I make these works of art and others, like Miguel's doing for us tonight, as a way of reflecting his light, a way of telling the story. He reached into the ash heap of my life, and now he's making me into something beautiful. That's what we need. That's the light. You know, Jesus said, he told us his mission. He didn't make us guess about it. I don't always announce my mission to you. Like, do you walk into Giant Eagle and say, hi, it's Chip, I'm here to buy groceries? I mean, we don't do that. But Jesus did. They wondered, they called him a glutton and a drunkard. He hung out with all the wrong people, and he took it as a compliment. They said, you're a friend of sinners. He said, yes. And he said, I came to seek and save the lost. That's what I came for. And people that don't know they're lost, like, I'm a waste of their time. And if you ever seen a search and rescue, do you know what they use a lot of? Lights. In my very first church in New Jersey, I was a youth pastor. I went off to seminary. I'd left the corporate arena. It was the first place they ever called me Reverend Freed, and I went in the men's room and threw up. I was just, what? Like, you call me Father Freed, I'll never forgive you, But I was in that church, and there was a man named Bernie. Bernie sang in our choir. He was a devout Catholic, but his wife was a Methodist, and she sang in the choir. So he came and sang in the choir, and he'd go to Mass later. And Bernie said to me, one morning, I was just a youth pastor. I don't know why he said it to me. He was going to be the liturgist, and he said, hey, we're singing Here I Am, Lord, today. I want that at my funeral. Like, wow, like, why you tell me? Like, I've been here 6 months. He died that weekend playing tennis. And we sang at his funeral, Here I Am, Lord. But you know what? We also went to his funeral, and all of us had flashlights in our pocket. You know why? Because it was my first Christmas Eve at that church. I had already gone back to our apartment down in Princeton. We were in a little apartment, Terry and I. And I found out later that in Bernie's neighborhood, there was a family having a Christmas party, and one of the young kids, like 3-4 years old, disappeared. And so the family went out and started, the whole neighborhood rallied, and they were looking for this child with flashlights. Turned out she was at the next door neighbors. It was a false alarm. But Bernie's wife told us later that he was out there until 1 o'clock in the morning looking for this child 4 hours after she'd been found. That's what Jesus says I came to do. I came with the light. So if you're feeling dark or you're feeling in some of those places, Jesus knows that. But like Janelle, when she felt found and that God was doing something new with her, she began to reflect that light with others. And here's the hinge point, folks. If you're here for the first time tonight, you're going to get it all. I've been warning the church we're going to do that for 5 weeks. The hinge is Jesus came and told us, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have what? The light of life. But then he turns to our followers, you and I, and he says, you. I was taught in seminary when I took homiletics, how to preach, don't say you. It's too direct. Say we or us. Jesus flunked homiletics. He said, you will be my witnesses. When I was growing up, I told people Smokey the Bear terrorized me. He did. Because you remember, once again, you're going to have to Google this. But Smokey the Bear, he was teaching us about, and you remember what his commercial was? Only you can prevent forest fires. Every night before I went to bed, I opened my window and threw water out the window. I just traumatized. Jesus does like that. You now, what? Are the light of the world. A city built on a hill. Jesus could have picked many words to use for light. Do you know the one he picked? It was a light that meant a watchfire. Some of you have traveled with me to Israel. If you go around the Sea of Galilee, there's cliffs way up there, and they would light watchfires to help people get home to safe harbor. He said, you're supposed to be my light. You're supposed to tell people that I came into the world. You're supposed to tell people that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and God didn't sit up on a throne so high that you had to come up and find him. But the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. He jumped into our story. He jumped into your situation. He jumped into your bedroom and your kitchen and your living room and said, I'm here for you. And so now you go be that light. You go reflect that light and let your light so shine before others, not that they'll give you glory, but they'll know that you are loving me in spite of who you are, that it has to be God at work in you, and they'll give glory to your Father in heaven so that you will see the light and you'll be the light. You'll reflect that light to others. I was thinking about that today. Christmas Eve is kind of a dark day for me. I'll tell you why in a minute, but I'm always a little modeling, but I was remembering I brought up 2020. You know, we were in 2020 and the world had been disrupted and our buildings were closed. The church never closed, but we didn't know what the heck to do. So we decided to go out in the parking lot. I don't know if some of you remember that. Some of you were around here, some of you weren't. And we Dre and Leah and the team, they had this amazing service they had taped, and it was out there on Mosaic, and it was powerful. But, you know, the Heritage folk, they wanted, you know, candlelight. So we said, let's go out in a parking lot. And I mean, we were in a parking lot on Christmas Eve, and our choir director hired a brass quartet on Christmas Eve outside. And I don't know if you remember, we had a blizzard. It wasn't the one that Rudolph had to fix, but it was bad. In fact, we sent Pastor Terry home. It's the only Christmas Eve. Pastor Scott and I were here. We said, Pastor Terry, go home. The roads are going to get bad. And I was walking around. I was so frustrated. I mean, it's a terrible year. And I'm like, oh, gosh, we're trying to be out here. I'm like, nobody's going to come. And if you know our trustee chair, Eddie Arnold, Eddie got more faith than I do. And Eddie said, well, we're going to have cars, Pastor. People are going to come. I said, okay, James Earl Jones. People aren't going to come. No, Ray, Field of Dreams. I'm catching you up. People will come, Chip, And I'm like, no, they're not going to come. He said, Chip, we're going to have more than 40 cars pull in here. I said, no, we're not. If we have more than 40 cars, I'll take you to lunch. He said, bet. We had 47 cars show up. Okay. Here I was out there in the snow, man. I had a nice beard. I looked like Father Christmas by the end of the night. And all of a sudden, all these cars came. They pulled in. And then we had a second one. We had a second service. I said, Eddie, okay, they all came for this. I mean, it was horrible. People weren't driving. There was no traffic. There was nothing. I said, people aren't going to come. He said, we're going to have 40 cars again. I said, if we do, I'll take you to dinner, too. And we had 41 cars show up to the next service. Confession's good for the soul. Eddie, I don't know where you are. I have not bought him lunch or dinner yet. I'm sorry. But I'm telling on myself, so I'm stuck. I got to take him wherever he wants to go. 4 years ago, and I haven't kept my word. I told you, we're not the light. We reflect the light, right? But we were out there, man, and it was that kind of Christmas Eve. And I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about this year. And I have permission from the family. I've been journeying. We've been journeying with a wonderful family here, the Willoughby family. And their son, Johnny, was such a bright light in this church. Bright light in our children's ministry, and his light transferred to another shore the Sunday before Thanksgiving. And we celebrate his life the Saturday on Thanksgiving weekend. And Steve and Morgan and their beautiful family, beautiful girls. And, you just don't have good words when that happens. And so the calling hours for Friday, the funeral service was Saturday. And Steve texted me after the calling hours. And he said, Chip, I didn't think we had any more tears to cry. And as they pulled into their neighborhood, this is what they saw. Can you play that back there? 700 luminaries were lit by their neighbors, guiding them home from the calling hours, from the funeral home to their house. And our house of prayer heard about that, and that's why they put up luminaries around our parking lot tonight, so that, Johnny's smile and Johnny's lights, it can keep shining. They had this, and I said, that's my whole Christmas Eve sermon, bro. And then Steve, I'm trying to move ahead, fellas, help me. There they are. Steve hit me last night on Christmas Eve. He said, well, they weren't finished yet. Look what they put in their yard last night in honor of Johnny. It's great when we see the light. But Jesus said, now you go be the light. That's your commission this year. If you're struggling, if you're in the ash heap, if you're hurting, I want you to see it. I want you to see signs of God's great resurrection. I want you, as I am, I'm remembering Johnny. I'm remembering his smile. And I love this family. There's a website. I hope you take a note of this, johnnysjourney.org. They put that up so that other young people who learn in special ways, they can raise money for. Even in the midst of that tough journey, it's light. There's light. There's life. There's signs of it. Look for it, right? I know it's a dark world, but this is the real story. That in him was light, and the light was the life of all people. And when you see that light, if you need to curl up to it, you need to feel it like Janelle did down there in a prison on a 10-year sermon and say, God reached into the mess of my life and he's making something beautiful. When you feel that, we don't just sit there, we reflect that light to the world. So when your children ask sometime, Mommy, why do we put lights on the tree? Why do we put lights in the house? Don't skip the intro. Tell them because in the beginning, wasn't us, wasn't our family. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God. And Jesus was God. And all things came into being through Jesus. And apart from him, not one thing came into being. And what came into being with him was life. And the life was light of all people. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can't, for all its might and all its roar, ever, ever, ever put it out. Amen? Merry